Since 2010, a lot has changed in my life. I'm a legitimate adult now. Not in my late teens or early 20s, but mid-20s. Serious, full-grown man of 25. I live at the other side of the country, doing completely different things than what I thought I would be doing when I was 14. My interests are completely different. I read books more than I play video games. I hate energy drinks. I love exercise. The person I was when I first happened upon a heavily reduced copy of the original Nier in a barely surviving blockbuster is a stranger to me in almost every way but one. Our favourite, most important video game experience of all time was in that box that he held in his hands 10 years ago. One of the few and only links to the past that holds who I am today and who I was as a teenage boy together. Now, what people mean when they say favourite video game can change depending on the person. A video game is a multitude of very different things, coalescing, complementing and contrasting. When you say favourite game, are you talking about gameplay or story? Are you talking about the fun HUD or the graphics, visual art style or progression? There's a whole list of other factors that come into the decision. For me, Nier exists apart from a lot of those things, because the elements melt away. Things like the shoddy graphics, repetitive gameplay, and inconsistent level design seem completely irrelevant. So below how important this game is to me, as a work of art, and as an experience that I feel has genuinely affected who I am as a person, and the life I live today, that has changed how I act and view the world around me. And for a long time it was an experience very few people knew or cared about. Since I first played the original Nier in 2010, the franchise is unrecognisable today, thanks to a sequel my teenage self literally thought was impossible. I mean, Nier Automata has sold over 5 million units at this point. 5 million. That's more than 6 times the entire series, including Drakengard up to this point. And that idea is just so surreal to me. It's been a really odd experience watching all this happen, and the upcoming remake really feels like a culmination of a lot of the changes to the franchise. This is exciting not just because I'm getting a remake of my favourite game, but a version of the game that I never got to play all those years ago. I'm hoping that with this remake, Nier will finally get the appraisal it really deserves. It feels like watching something come full circle, and I wanted to talk about that. Because as I said, this remake is different, and things have changed. And in that change is some really interesting and unique things. And they make me conflicted, and ultimately I love that I'm conflicted. So yeah, I'm gonna say right now that this video is super rambly. It's sort of me getting my thoughts out about the series, and getting ready to replay the game again for the first time in 8 years. So yeah, Nier is getting a remaster. A game that barely sold 500,000 units is getting a full remaster, complete with a beautiful special edition that I seriously regret not pre-ordering. A game that to this day is still relatively considered an obscure bargain bin style budget game. So how did this happen? It's impossible to talk about the upcoming Nier remake without talking about the series' newfound popularity, as it has such a bearing on its upcoming release. The Nier franchise of today is something completely unrecognisable to the one of 10 years ago. With the release of Nier Automata in 2017, the series has had more success in just 1 year than the preceding 14 years that Yoko Taro's strange universe has been around. Apart from we always knew that if Square would just give Yoko Taro a real budget, instead of just slinging some spare change at him whenever they wanted him to get out of the house, that the franchise would finally escape the budget games with a lot to say identity, if it could just finally get the gameplay right. The second that I saw the announcement and saw Platinum Games logo attached, I just knew that this was it. This is when the gaming industry would finally take this franchise seriously. And yet even knowing that, I was still blown away by just how successful Automata would go on to be. 5.5 million units. To put that into perspective, that's more than the recent Marvel Avengers, Final Fantasy 13, and these games. This wasn't just success, it was big league success. And that distinction is important because Nier isn't just a series now. It's a franchise. Where once it inhabited the shady basement as Square Enix's deformed bastard child, it is now proudly displayed as one of their premium series. Characters like 2B and 9S are part of the gaming canon, cosplayed and depicted with more frequency than even Final Fantasy and Metal Gear Solid characters. Hell, there's even a mobile game coming out, a subgenre of games that literally only exist to make money from a franchise's namesake, and now one exists in the Nier universe. This all feels so odd for a franchise that once inhabited such a small corner of the internet that trying to even find discussion on forums was difficult. While a sequel or a spin-off in a franchise suddenly being successful isn't exactly unheard of, I've yet to see it happen so abruptly, and in such a strange way. It's a hugely successful sequel to a niche spin-off of an even more niche PS2 Dynasty Warriors style game. Like, just how unprecedented Automata's success is makes it all the more surreal. What makes the entire situation even stranger is that the discrepancy in popularity between the two halves of the franchise are still completely evident. Just scroll through the Nier subreddit and then switch over to the Replicant one to see how lopsided the new popularity is. I should point out that all of this is good. I'm definitely not a bitter hipster who's annoyed that his favourite franchise is not popular. It's actually the exact opposite. Anxiously checking Gameatsu every week following the Japanese release of Replicant 3, and praying that the sales would manage to break at least 20,000 so a Western release would even be possible. Or the fact that as well as being obscure, Yoko Taro, the brilliant troll that he is, would release a lot of plot integral story as short stories, scripts, and books that you were about as likely to get in the West as you were not to feel existentially terrified playing through Automata. Now we actually get those, a bunch of them at that, and the community isn't relying on the absolute saintly grace of one translator, and I'm going to butcher the name, Reka Alexia, who translated stories like The Fighters of Pompeii back when only a few hundred people were searching for them. Now, when Taro decides he wants to release a stage play, with integral plot points in the music CD jacket, we don't have to wait years to know what the hell is going on. Back when I was 15, I remember using the relative failure and underappreciation of the Nier and Replicant franchise as proof that the gaming landscape was in trouble. And while I still carry a lot of that angsty teenage pessimism about a lot of things, after the absolute success of Automata, as well as games like Persona 5 and Dragon Quest XI, the state of gaming in the 8th and 9th gen isn't one of them. But that newfound popularity is bringing changes to the series, because throughout its life, Yoko Taro's games have almost been defined by the changes, censorship, and localization issues that have come with each entry. From the original Replicant's heavy censorship, removing themes that I feel even if I mentioned would probably get me in trouble with the YouTube police.
I don't want you to go! Why can't you come? Stop!
The second game being the embodiment of censorship, and Replicant 3 not so much being censored, but just poorly localized, to where character motivations and ways of speaking are completely changed. And of course, the topic of this video, the original Nier. So it isn't exactly a secret, but the upcoming Nier Replicant, or as its full name, Nier Replicant version 1.224744877139, and yes, that is the last time I will be saying that, isn't actually a remaster of the original Western release from 2010. See, the original Nier probably deserves the title for the most egregious example of localization tampering done to a game. See, when the original Nier was released, the Japanese gaming industry was caught on the back foot. From the NES all the way up to the heyday of the PS2, the Japanese gaming industry pretty much reigned supreme when it came to RPGs, with franchises like Final Fantasy and MGS occupying a space comparable to that of the Assassin's Creed and Fallouts of today. It's hard to believe that just 3, Jesus, it's been 3 console generations since the PS2, that the release of the next Final Fantasy was as huge as the annual release of Call of Duty today. But come the next generation, things had started to head south for the JRPGs of the world. Where the generation before, Western RPGs had mainly inhabited a more hardcore space on PCs, with likes of Baldur's Gate and Diablo, kept mostly separate from the core audiences on consoles. Coming into the 7th gen, the JRPG found itself up against stiffer competition, from franchises like Elder Scrolls and Dragon Age, bringing the previously hardcore Western RPG designs to the mainstream. Couple this with a list of unfortunate misses, like Final Fantasy creator Hironobu Sakaguchi's partnership with Microsoft, that saw the big budget JRPGs Blue Dragon and Lost Odyssey fail to generate the numbers. Further, even the Final Fantasy franchise itself was feeling the pressure of the West. Though Final Fantasy XIII sold well, the reception from audiences left Square Enix questioning their approach. As an aside, I really liked 13, and 13-2 is just stuff. By the time 2010 had rolled around, the Japanese market was feeling the effect, and until the release and eventual success of the Soul series, which managed to find a strong middle ground between the two styles, the industry wouldn't really recover. Even still, it would be a fair few years before franchises like Persona and Octopath would bring the older style of RPG back to popularity. But in the years between 2009 and 2012, the Japanese gaming industry found itself in its most difficult crossroads. I cover a lot of what happened after this in my deep down video. It's a year old, I hate it, please watch it, thanks. This is the landscape that the original Nier was released into. Coming in the spring of 2010, from the offset Nier was being developed with Western sensibilities in mind. After originally being conceived as the third entry in the Replicant series, something Yoko still considers it. At least he did until Zero's Murderous Rampage released 3 years later. The game's combat was inspired by PlayStation's God of War series, despite the series' relative lack of popularity in the East. The game was intended to fill a space similar to Square Enix's Kingdom Hearts series, but for a more hardcore audience, with the heavy use of blood and profanity being a rarity among Square Enix's catalogue. However, despite its fairly Western inspirations, Square's American branch continued to put pressure on Yoko Taro and his team at Caviar to further make the game appeal to Western audiences, particularly in regards to the playable character. See, in a lot of the RPGs of the East, it's far more common to see young, more androgynous, and more angsty protagonists. A theme found in a lot of Eastern media, particularly in games, is a journey of young adolescence into adulthood. Characters like Herp in Final Fantasy XIII, Leonard in White Knight Chronicles, Sora in Kingdom Hearts all have elements of this, as well as having the over-the-top, spiky hair, colourful, belt-heavy outfits, and a whole lot of being confused all the time.
Who's there? Huh? Well, what are you talking about? Why don't you start making sense?
In the West, middle-aged father figures with a more understated, strong appearance hold more appeal, with the likes of Geralt of Rivia, Adam Jensen, and Hawke in Dragon Age 2. It was with these sentiments in mind that Square pushed the team to create an entirely new protagonist for the West, and two separate versions of the game, Nier Replicant and Gestalt. The former, a PS3 exclusive only released in Japan, that featured the game's original younger brother design, and Gestalt, an Xbox exclusive that featured an older father-type protagonist. While this created a unique reason to play on both consoles in Japan, only one version would be released in the West. In probably the most 2010 move ever, the subtitles were dropped and Nier Gestalt was simply Nier on both consoles, and that was the version that I played years ago. That bum-faced Jameson Price voice Grouch was the protagonist of my favourite game. With his ugly design, earnest nature and love for his daughter powering his quest, he became one of my favourite protagonists, and in the years that came, engraved himself deeply in my memory. He is Nier for me. The unconventionally beat up and largely accepted as non-canon version of Nier is Nier for me, and he won't be here when I play the game again. And that's a weird feeling, but it kinda makes sense. So yeah, the upcoming Nier Replicant random jumble of numbers isn't the original version of the game. And to be clear, when I was younger I really wanted this version. I wanted to start learning Japanese just so I could play this thing. That along with many dreams obviously didn't happen. But still I always held out hope that I'd see that version of the game. And well, I got that wish. 11 years on, I'll finally get to play the version of the original game that I couldn't back then. But the cost is that when I finally do it, it won't be the same game. It'll be a new version with the younger, spiky haired protagonist. I can't help but think of the recently released Snyder Cut of Justice League, where Zack Snyder finally gets to release his version of his movie, after his original was cut and reworked to try and appeal more to the popularity of Marvel films. But the difference here is that unlike Justice League, people actually like the Gestalt version of Nier. Sure, Papa Nier was ugly as hell. Sure, the character model stays the same, making an integral part of the later game less impactful, and sure, when looking at the two it's clear that he was an afterthought compared to his younger counterpart. But this was my version of the game. How do you reconcile that feeling, between excitement and something new, and the fundamental change of a game so near to your heart, one you feel has affected your life in a meaningful way? And then I remembered what the meaning of Nier was. Yeah, this is the spoiler part of the video. Now, while talking about the message and meaning of the original Nier is something I could write an entire book about at this point, its main themes are ignorance, belief, and sacrifice. Truly altruistic sacrifice. Nier asks players a lot about what they believe to be true, about how their view of reality is just one of many, and believing you are doing the right thing isn't necessarily the same as doing the right thing. In the end, it asks us if we can sacrifice, not just in a superficial way, but truly sacrifice. And it gets that point across so powerfully in Ending D. After saving Yona from the Shadow Lord, inadvertently dooming the human race by killing its only saviour, but that's beside the point, the sheer tyrant trapped inside Kainer's body is unable to contain himself. After being exposed to too much light, and Nier must choose to sacrifice his entire existence to save... Look, it's all kind of convenient, but the point is this. After witnessing every member of Nier's party sacrifice and die for the lost, hopeless cause that they believe in, the player is finally asked to truly sacrifice as well. To delete their saved data, lose all record of the sacrifice they made, and all of their progress and effort gone. The player isn't rewarded for this, it's a completely unrecognised sacrifice. And with it, your entire journey as Papa Nier is gone. His misguided journey to save his daughter Yona, his grumpy, curmudgeon-y attitude toward Weiss and Kainer.
You can really do that?
I am Grimoire Weiss. My very name brings kingdoms to their knees.
Then get to it already, Weiss!
You will refer to me by my full and proper name. Prepare to... oh dear.
Oh dear?
It seems that the frantic bludgeoning you gave me earlier has caused my memory to escape me.
What?!
His caring nature toward the village he lives in, riding the boar. All of it was sacrificed for a cause that no one knew about. And for a while I didn't want to make that sacrifice. That's kind of what's so brilliant about Nier. When I first played the game, I really didn't get all of this. I finished ending A and still believed our quest was good. I was naive and didn't pay attention to the finer details. So by the time I reached the end, I thought I'd reached the happy end of a man's quest to save his daughter, and for a while that's how I left it. But the game never left me. Something played on my mind, and the following year I played through the game again, reading lore, playing the Drakengard games, and reading all the short stories. I played through all the endings and finally realised my ignorance. Finally realising that all I had done been misguided. Not evil, but wrong. With this, Nier had delivered the most impactful message about ignorance, about belief and faith and sacrifice that I'd ever experienced. And with that, the decision to delete my save data made sense, as the final act of Papa Nier's dark, misguided tale. And after my save was deleted, I always felt trepidation about returning to Nier. It's my favourite game, and yet thematically, it never felt right to start again. I watched Let's Plays after, read and watched countless lore videos, short stories, timelines and summaries, but despite owning various copies of the game, I never wanted to embark on the journey again, feeling that it would somehow diminish that original sacrifice. But the upcoming Nier Replicant isn't going to be the same game. When I load up the remaster, one I've waited for since the original release came out, it won't be the same story. It'll be a similar story of a brother trying to save his sister, but it won't be the same. And with that, the original sacrifice that I made 10 years ago still gets to stand. Just like how Papa Nier was forgotten by everyone, the original version, the budget janky game that no one played, will eventually be forgotten as well. Soon Replicant will become a lot of people's first experience with the game, and the idea of a different version will largely be forgotten. Thematically, however unintentional that it is, re-releasing the Replicant version makes the original experience even better. That ending can still exist, when I finally get to play Nier again later this month. While a part of me is sad that Papa Nier is gone, it only makes the overall message of Nier better. His sacrifice is done. Things even in the world of Nier aren't the same as they were back then. Just as I've changed through the 10 years, so has Nier. From a weird janky budget game with a lot of heart, to a beloved series, one that looks unrecognisable to the one from then, but still with the same heart, character and genuine meaning that made it so dear to me all those years ago. Nier Replicant gives me a chance to experience it for the first time again. I get to experience going out onto the northern plain and listen to the newly recorded Hills of Radiant Wind for the first time. Feel the true impact of that 5-year gap, with the character model change, and feel the heartbreak of ending B, and make that sacrifice for the first time all over again. The release of Nier Replicant marks the end of one era, but the start of a new one. Yoko Taro says a lot of weird, insightful, and refreshingly candid things, but one that he is always consistent about is his wish to never repeat himself. He's gone on record numerous times saying that he never wants to make the same game twice. And I mean, just look at the last 3 games that he's made. You'd struggle to believe that they are all technically set in the same universe. I think inherently we're adverse to change, especially in video games, where a name becomes synonymous with a specific type of gameplay or world, and especially in the re-release culture of today, where most of the market is just us reliving our glory years and overpriced remasters, so we don't have to try anything new. I love that even in a remaster, even if it is completely unintentional, that Taro's philosophy is still held up. Because sure, a part of me is sad that the game is changing. A part of me longs for the days when this series was just my thing, but when I remember what Nier was trying to tell me, that sometimes we sacrifice, we can do things without recognition, because those unseen sacrifices make way for something more. All of the unseen Nier and Drakengard fans, the people who signed petitions, translated script books, and continue to talk into the void about this weird little series, it was this unseen sacrifice, this passion that got us here today. Nier Replicant isn't my Nier, and that's great, it's something else now. Still weird, existential, and unlike anything else, but different, and different is always a good thing. So Papa Nier will live in the past with the older me, and together we'll look forward to the release of Replicant. So yeah, you know what's great about making heavily scripted long-form content? When info drops mid-edit that could potentially make your entire video irrelevant. So while I was halfway through recording this video, Square released this. And gee, that blurry gentleman over there sure looks familiar. It seems like with this there's a large possibility that Papa Nier is coming back in some way. Especially since literally today, producers on the game teased some new content, including cut boss fights from the original, and something for fans of Papa Nier. The skeptical part of me thinks this might probably just be the World of Recycled Vessels content, a sort of boss rush DLC that was the only way that people could play as Brother Nier in the original, where in Replicant you got to play as old Nier. Another part thinks it could be a sort of New Game Plus thrown in at the end. That would be pretty cool, even if it shits on the entire idea of this video, but what can you do? Though the fact that I couldn't find Jameson Price listed anywhere as being in the game makes it 50-50 at this point. And if they've recast him, that kinda sucks. But anyway, that's content for another video. A huge shout out on this video goes out to Jeremy NG, whose stunning piano renditions of the Nier soundtrack you've been hearing throughout this video. I'll be leaving links to his Spotify and YouTube versions of the Nier soundtrack in the description. This video took a little while, but so far that once a month content drop is still holding. Thank you to all the people who watched my last video. The comments and support on that one was really encouraging, and it's all made my return to content creating all the more enjoyable. I'm still toying with the idea of doing a review or something for Nier Replicant when it drops, so let me know if anyone would be interested in seeing that or any other content. I know a lot of the time content creators say leave your suggestions below, but I'm serious. Like, give me ideas, I'm clueless. So thanks so much for watching, like the video if you enjoyed, and consider subscribing if this is the kind of content you want to see.